Did you ever hear the tragedy of Star Wars Squadrons? I thought not. It's not a story EA would tell you. It's a gaming legend.
Star Wars Squadrons is an enigma. A rise and fall so quick it barely left a mark. One day it was the most hyped game releasing, the next week, irrelevant. If a time traveler went back in time and stopped this game from being developed, the timeline we are on wouldn't change in the slightest. Now personally, I have a soft spot for this game. I was hyped for its release and sunk many hours into playing it well after it launched. I love the game, and as I played more and more, I was sadly forced to watch it die player by player until I could only find matches by joining co-op games against AI. So how did this happen? The game is beautiful, plays well, and offers the best starfighter gameplay in Star Wars video game history. Shout out to TIE Fighter and X-Wing, but this game is peak. That being said, just a month after its release, Squadrons had lost over 90% of its player base and it never recovered. It currently rests with only 80 players, dead lobbies, and a pile of mixed reviews. While the usual culprit of a rushed, incomplete launch is obvious, there must be something else that drove players away. Plenty of games have moved past a bad launch, and surely a Star Wars game of this quality could have, but it didn't. Why? Perhaps it was indeed the bugs and balance issues at launch that led to the drought of players. Maybe it was the mishandled rank system, or long matchmaking queues. It could also be that this is just not the game the Star Wars community expected. With its unique gameplay and high skill curve, it stands alone among the typical FPS or story-driven Star Wars games. To get to the bottom of how this game flopped so hard, we're gonna have to do some digging. We're going to look at the state of the game on release, post-launch, and what the current state of Star Wars Squadrons is. So let's get started. Well, the world first heard of Star Wars Squadrons on July 15th, 2020, and its release and peak player count happened later that year on October 2nd. On release, the critics reviewed this game as generally favorable, if not great. And while there were some issues at launch that others experienced, luckily for myself, I was able to dive right in and start playing. And man, this game was perfect. It takes some practice to get used to, sure, but that obstacle comes with the advantage of total mobility. The multiplayer matches were rewardingly intense, and the immersion I felt while playing against players was unmatched. But that was the problem. It was only great when there were people to play with. As I played week after week, it was harder and harder to find people to play with, and playing against the AI gets stale pretty fast. Although I was experiencing what I considered to be peak Star Wars gameplay, it was clear the community felt different, and I think it's important to find out why. Looking through Reddit and Steam, I came across a bunch of half answers. Some didn't like the forced first-person perspective, others claim it didn't accurately capture the feel of a Star Wars game, people complained about ship balancing issues, and overall many just saw it as a bad game. But I think there has to be a more substantial reason this game failed. And surprisingly, I don't actually think it's entirely EA's fault this time. Wild statement, I know, but there's a first for everything. To me, there are three key reasons this game failed. And we're going to look at all of them through two different perspectives. One through the lens of the game upon release, and another with the current state of the game in 2024.
How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
This game received only 4 updates. Most were bug fixes, some added maps or ship components, but the only substantial change came with the last patch, which added in a couple of new ships, including the B-Wing and TIE Defender, and a few more cosmetics. This was on December 11th, and by that time, the game was already considered to be dead. Now, to be fair, back then, it wasn't as bad as it is today. You could still manage to find some ranked lobbies, and death matches didn't take too long to load into. There was still a small fraction of loyal players enjoying the game. I remember the release of the B-Wing and TIE Defender fondly. They both added very unique roles to the game's already highly interesting ranked mode, which for those of you who haven't played it, was an amazing MOBA-style strategic 5v5 battle between starfighters, frigates, and capital ships. It's a blast. Playing today, the visuals hold up amazingly, and flying an X-Wing in VR still hits the same. The patches made are evident, and the ships added still feel completely fleshed out and viable. But there is that ever-lingering issue of having no one to play with. Maybe if this game had gone the more popular live service route, it would have seen more success. I know that EA had hyped this game up to be the next major addition to esports, but it never got the care a competitive game needs to succeed long term. Still, what we got on release and through the few updates was more than enough in my eyes to continue playing. So what else went wrong?
Take this upstairs, and be sure not to drop it. Whoa! Wow.
It was always a risk taking Battlefront 2's least popular game mode and fully fleshing it out into its own game. Many players simply weren't interested in a Star Wars game that wasn't an FPS shooter or an action-adventure single-player game. For a game like this, there were always going to be fewer initial players on release. But the way it catered to lovers of spaceship combat should have helped a little, right? Well, as much as I and a dedicated few loved the high-skill, intense dogfights of Squadrons, it was always a niche game that required a specific kind of player. The learning curve was steep, and for many, that time investment was not worth the reward. Even within the Star Wars fanbase, not everyone is a die-hard starfighter enthusiast. And I think this is where EA starts to take some of the blame. EA set out to make a competitive space combat simulator, which on paper sounds like a fantastic idea. However, the marketing didn't adequately convey the steep learning curve in niche gameplay, which led to mismatched expectations. Many players seem to have expected a more casual, pick-up-and-play experience like the space battles in Battlefront, but they were instead met with a complex, demanding flight simulator. And as a result, players quickly moved on to other games that promised more regular updates and fresh experiences.
How did we get into this mess? We seem to be made to suffer. It's our lot in life.
As I've mentioned numerous times, this game had a major issue with retaining player counts from the get-go. For a game that focuses so heavily on simulating dogfights and strategic fleet battles, this quickly became a problem. I tried everything I could do to get into games. I joined Discord servers for finding groups, played with ranked clans, and would wait upwards of an hour or two just to get into a fleet battle. And week after week, the time to play got longer and longer. Yes, dogfights were usually easier to load into, and there is a game mode where you can play player versus AI fleet battles. But this game was literally crafted and made for its PvP fleet battles, which are incredibly fun and challenging. They require coordination between bombers, fighters, interceptors, and support ships alike, and for me, these were a blast. But today, in 2024, they are unplayable. Not in a sense that they are bugged out or glitched, there's just no one to play with. This drought of players is what eventually drove me and many other fans of Squadrons away. We held out hope for months that something would change, that people would finally see the gem of a game that this is, or that another update would come, but nothing. The player base continued to dwindle, and the time it took to play the game's best mode got too long for anyone to justify waiting, and so the game just died. Thanks for watching this love letter to one of my favorite Star Wars games. I so very much wish this game had gotten more traction, and it's very sad to see the current state of the game. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. The vast majority of those who watch my channel aren't subscribed, and for a small channel like mine, every sub means a lot and pushes me to continue making quality videos. Also, we now have a Discord. Join to get up-to-date stream and video updates and to just hang out. The link will be in the description. Don't forget to leave a comment on your thoughts about Star Wars Squadrons and how you felt when you played it. I always love hearing y'all's feedback. Remember to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.